Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of A Piece of Ash. This is my weekly show where you get to ask me questions. I wax philosophical about wargaming. We have a big chat in the chat, and then I take questions from the mailbag as well that you can enter every single week. So this week we're going to talk about a very old debate in wargaming, and that's IGOUGO versus the integrated game turn. It's probably really important that I define what those two things mean before we get started, because for a lot of people watching, these might not be familiar terms. So when I say IGOUGO, that's a very classic any type of board game or tabletop game style where one player takes a complete turn and then the other player takes a complete turn. You're probably familiar with IGOUGO in games like Warhammer 40K, and even War Machine. It is a very popular format, and it's especially good at handling large numbers of models. When you have a lot to get through, and you have a large army, IGOUGO can be the most sort of like streamlined way of doing things because it means that you get to the conclusion of at least a turn relatively quickly. There's some games that have actually put an emphasis on the IGOUGO part of the game. The best example I can think of currently on the market is Kings of War. As an intentional design thing, they've removed absolutely all player interaction from the game turn. When you are active in your turn in Kings of War, you do everything. You rolled a hit, you rolled a wound, you even make the nerve tests on your opponent instead of by your opponent. And what this does is it massively speeds up a rank and flank mass combat game. They've also done things like removed casualty removal from the game. So for instance, when you play a game of Kings of War, even though it's a big block infantry game, the big blocks of infantry are effectively dioramas, and what they have is they have damage that they accrue. And once they have hit a certain amount of damage, when they make a nerve test, they either just rout and they're completely removed from the game, or they become wavered, in which case they are inactive for a turn. Basically, they're held back. Special rules can trump that. But it means that your opponent is literally not doing anything during the turn. The balance of that is, in Kings of War, the game turn is fast enough that you're typically not disengaged from the game. And that's the risk really in IGOUGO, is that you spend so long inactive that you become a spectator in your own game and you feel disengaged from the process. I think Kings of War is probably the best example I can think of. It's a Licio Cavatore game of an IGOUGO system that really works, where every effort's been made to make the turns quick and speedy, and to be effective still at portraying the type of game it wants to be, which is a movement-oriented rank and flank game where positioning and pivoting are the big part of the game. And so what you're doing effectively during that game is you are setting up a puzzle for your opponent to try and unravel, and then it's puzzle, counter puzzle, puzzle, counter puzzle during the maneuvering parts of each player turn. Then we've got lots of integrated game turn stuff. And if you look, actually it's funny, is I think the popularity of skirmish games in the last little while have pushed integrated game turn games very heavily going forward, where because you're using so few models, to create a great player experience, you don't want one opponent to be able to jump on the other and just remove all their pieces all at once. This was a thing that was sort of endemic in War Machine for a little while with the gotcha moments, where you could literally just lose half your army and not be doing anything. You're just watching it happen. You're just watching your army just get decimated and feel like you've lost all franchise in the game, like you've lost control. There's a lot of wombo combos and things like Mark II that could result in a huge piece of your army just disappearing. And because you don't even make armor saves like you would in a game like Warhammer 40K, which at least gives you the illusion of doing something. Like, the armor saves could just as easily be rolled by anybody. You could have an app do it, you could have your opponent do it, but it gives you the illusion that you're doing something. The only thing I think in War Machine would be tough rolls, but they're not everywhere, not everybody gets them. And there are a few other things like countercharge that can interrupt the turn. You're just sort of sitting and taking it for a while. And so that was something that they wanted to avoid in smaller games, because when you have fewer pieces, you don't want to lose a whole bunch of them all at once. And that can make a game that's a skirmish size game very lopsided. And you actually see Privateer Press do something about this in Company of Iron, where it goes to an IGOUGO or integrated game turn system, where you're each counter moving a single model, and it instantly blows up all the possibilities of just a sweeping turn where half the table gets removed, basically. But of course, then you run the risk of complication. If you give people too many options or too much stuff to do, you have this. You have, I think, the steep learning curve of sometimes you've got sort of almost too many things going on, and the integrated game turn, if it's especially based on action reaction, can become convoluted and can be off-putting. So there's, in both sides of the pendulum, there's going too far, and then there's trying to find sort of a sweet spot, and they tend to be designed for different things. Integrated game turns work better with lower model counts. To have an integrated game turn, and it's actually something that we did back in 5th edition. Friends of mine, we attempted to play 40k with an integrated game turn. It didn't work as well. The game wasn't designed to support that kind of stuff, and it actually slowed the game down immensely. I think we got 3 turns into like a 1,500, 1,800 point game before we called it quits, because certain armies aren't designed with that in mind. For instance, if you were to take an Imperial Guard army and fight a Deathwing Terminator army, you would have so many more activations than your opponent that it would cause the game basically to break, because you're activating a little guard squad, I have to commit my Terminators, and then by the time my entire army is gone of Deathwing, you've still got like 15 or 20 activations to go in your army, and you just get to see and do whatever you want. That doesn't really feel like it represents an elite, highly disciplined and strategic army taking advantage of a maybe more disorganized larger force. It feels like the larger force there is always going to have the initiative because they always get to go last, and they get to go last a whole bunch of times. So it's one of those things where they have to be designed with all of these things in mind to give the best player experience. In my mind, IGOUGO and the integrated game system, there isn't a right answer here. It's all horses for courses. It's what kind of rules support what kind of experience you're trying to provide to the people that you're writing the rules for. You can see that certain games where perhaps they've felt like the franchise and the players during a longer player turn is sort of like going away, there are efforts being made to engage the players. The new 40k, for instance, with command points and stratagems, is very definitely trying to engage you during your opponent's turn. Having the ability to reroll a single die, to make a clutch armor save, to be able to play stratagems that react to your opponent, for instance, giving bonuses like extra cover or countercharging, interrupting the charging sequence to be able to go first in close combat. All of those things give you choices, give you things that you can do during the opponent turn that make it not so static, and where you're just sort of sitting and taking the damage for an entire, phase, basically, or group of phases, depending on how big the player turn is. And it's that trying to find that sweet spot in the middle. I think the best example of a hybrid, because there are some hybrid games that are somewhat IGOUGO and somewhat integrated game systems, would be Infinity. Infinity sits almost perfectly in the middle between these two things, where while you do have an IGOUGO system, one player is the active player and the other player is the reactive player. One person is controlling the flow of the game by issuing orders and dictating where the action takes place. The other player is reacting based upon what that player does. Both sides have franchise. Both sides have tons of choices they can make, and it makes the game very engaging, because even when you're not doing something Infinity, you're either planning what you're going to do next, or you're planning your reactions, or trying to sort of think about what your opponent's going to do. It's very much like Kings of War in that you're setting up a puzzle for your opponent that he has to try and solve during his active turn, and then you're reacting to his problem solving with your own pieces and trying to see what you want to do next. So I think it's very interesting. You've got tons of sort of different games out there. If you go and look at the cover sheet for this video, you can see some lumped in different categories. Certain skirmish games are experimenting with that too, where they didn't do it before. So, for instance, Necromunda was an IGOUGO game with certain elements of reaction. Things like Overwatch existed in Necromunda previously, and in the new Gang War, Necromunda Underhive box set, it's entirely an alternate activation system. You go back and forth, activating models and having counter move as opposed to my whole gang goes, your whole gang goes. And it's funny, one of, I think, the best integrated game turn games that Games Workshop ever did, which is the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game, is very much exactly an integrated game turn. It's I move, you move. There's a priority system, and then I move, you move, I shoot, you shoot, and then we all fight at the same time. It made for a very dynamic game because everything is always in motion, and you're always, while one player is basically dictating the splits, so like just determining who goes first, who picks things first, the game is always in motion all the time with both sides. You can't move somewhere first, get there, and then not expect to suffer a countercharge by the opponent player because they get to do something afterwards. So I think it's going to be really interesting going forward to see where games land on this spectrum. There's always going to be people that prefer one to the other, but I think what that's more the nature of is it's a preference of A, how engaged I am in a game, and B, what types of games do I like. If you prefer mass combat games, if you like playing games with hundreds of miniatures, you're more likely to have a bias towards the IGOUGO system, or some form of IGOUGO, because there's lots of shades of gray in here too, versus an integrated game turn, which may be more laborious if you're trying to use tons and tons and tons of models. And so, yeah, so I think it's an interesting debate. It's certainly one worth talking about. So let's jump into the chat, see what people are saying. I think I saw that Anthony Lee and Benson Green are having, like, they basically just, like, solved all the world's problems beginning of this while I wasn't live out, like, for, like, 30 minutes. So if you scroll to the very top of the chat if you're watching this live, go check it out, because, like, there's a whole bunch of discussion, I think, that maybe just says some of the things I just said. But let's see who's here and what people are talking about. To the top. Anthony's here, Benson's here. Like I said, they dominate like the first half of the chat as I was scrolling down to see what's going on. Actually, more than half of the chat. Who else is here? Torben Kasper's here. John Thompson's here. I'm just ignoring what they're saying because I'm just looking for names right now. Ben Grandpa Nurgle's here. Paulo01's here. Who else? Tim Barry's here. Hooray! And there's where I actually go live. So literally 2/3 of the chat happened before I actually went live. Jonathan Lowry's here, Mike Grimshaw's here, Charlie Cooper's here. Who else? Kelly Merrill's here. I'm going to butcher this. Zemislaw Sinak? I think I'm terrible with names. Brutalitops is here. I'm actually better with internet handles than I am with names. Julian Farnham's here. Toby Hall's here. Tobex is here. Miso's here. Quinn Murphy's here. Neil Bolden's here. Sarah Ann LaHaye's here. Who else? Wheaton Trans here. Like I said, terrible with names. Benoit Cruz here. Kevin Mateski's here. Zyman Zarek's here. Inquisitor Shavak's here. Wow, actual Inquisitor Shavak. It's a very famous Inquisitor. Kevin Mateski's here. Dan Harris is here. I'm trying to get to the bottom, make sure I haven't missed anybody. I might. Mailev's here. BF Dahoud's here. And did I get everybody? It looks like I got everybody who said hello so far. Mario Dongu's here. Mike Wolf's here, and just shouts your mother because he's just a Mike Wolf today. Blade Wolf 09's here. Although I think he shouts your mother at the beginning of all the videos he's into. So, Legends of Albadin's here. Chris S is here. Christopher Norton's here. Vox Officer's here. Edward Cote's here. And I think that's it. I think I said hi to everybody. I'm hoping I said hi to everybody. I'm scrolling as I go through. It seems to be the consensus that so far, just scrolling through the chat, that every game could do better somewhere. I'm hearing lots of different games get shouted out where there's always some element of that game that they wish was either more engaging or less convoluted. And I think that's what this seems to have churned up here. Alexander Cheng's here. And it's funny because I think that's the balance you're trying to cast here, is that every game, like I said, if this is a spectrum between IGOUGO and the integrated game turn, what you could even just replace that with is sort of like engaged or disengaged, because those are almost what those two things kind of represent. On the far end, you have like Kings of War, where during your inactive turn you are just totally disengaged from the game. You do not do anything. And it's completely intentional. It's 100% in the designer notes that was the idea, is you speed up the game as much as possible by having one player do everything to do with dice, versus, hyper integrated game turns where there's some games out there. So for instance, great integrated game system would be things like Bushido, where actually guys can go more than once. Pulp City has something like that too, where you have a tired exhausted system where models can do long things that exhaust them, or they can do short things that make them tired. And there's this sort of like duel back and forth. And again, both of them convey very different feelings too. So if you just think about the feelings that this is conveying, marching forward, big battalions of guys has this sort of sense of grandeur to it. You know what I mean? This you can hear the clomping boots and the drums beating and stuff. Whereas in a game like Bushido, having this little duel of move counter move is, again, very much, it feels like a fencing match. It feels like two people sword fighting, where you're trying to sort of like, I guess, outguess or outfox your opponent on what your next move might be, or bait them into doing something they don't necessarily want to do. And both convey a feeling that I think is evocative of what you're trying to capture gameplay styles and gameplay wise. So while it is about engagement, disengagement too, I think there's something to do with just how you want a game to feel. So like I said earlier, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. I think both of them can have their merits, because I love playing Kings of War simply because it's a rank and flank game that I can get like 3 games of in a night, where I'd be able to play maybe one game of Warhammer Fantasy Battle. But coming up in the future, you've got the new Song of Ice and Fire miniature game, which is an alternate activation rank and flight game, and we'll see how that goes. I'm not sure how that's going to work, or what kind of feelings you're going to get from playing that. But that's the design decision they've made, where it's going to be move, counter move, not necessarily a march forward and a puzzle unlock. So it's going to be interesting. I'm excited about seeing the future of this and sort of what comes down. We've got a lot of people mentioning the War Machine stuff, because I did mention the sort of like gotcha moment things, and I do think that's an interesting thing, is that you do have sort of a built into the gameplay idea that you're building into combos with that game. Is it's how do I take X to do Y? And a lot of supporting units are designed to do that. They give bonuses to nearby things, rerolls, whatever it is, so that you do break into this idea that you can remove or delete big portions of your opponent's army all in one go through these sort of build-up combos. It's almost like watching those fighting games where someone's special bar is filled up and they launch into this super combo and just delete the opposing fighter in one big cool hyper animation of a million kicks and stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to accept the feeling you're going to give someone playing it for the first time, especially if it is literally the first time. If you were to have a new player go and play an existing player, and that existing player is trying to give them the real experience, let's play a competitive game. This guy might already be a wargamer, whoever, but they do that, there's going to be a sense of a lack of control. I didn't know this could happen, and then it happened to me. And maybe it won't happen again next time, but is there going to be a next time? Because I didn't necessarily have a great gameplay experience the first time around. And that's going to be sort of the interesting thing going forward, is where do games land on this spectrum. Tim Berry says the 2-hour wargame system is IGOUGO, with lots of opportunities for the inactive player to interrupt and or react to the active player. Yeah, no, absolutely. The Battlefield Evolution series, Starship Troopers series, both written by Andy Chambers, well, the originally written by Andy Chambers and ported over by other people, uses a very similar mechanic, where it is IGOUGO, but there's lots of, like you said, interacts, where you can interrupt your opponent and do something. It's a bit like playing a company-level game of Infinity, where you can have guys be on alert, basically, and alert units can do things. And then the game emphasizes things like suppressing fire or pinning to try and take units off of alert so that they can't necessarily react when you're around them and you're doing things. And again, it's I think there's a lot of game designers that try and work around the intrinsic sort of challenges of one of the two systems to draw the other side back in, right? You want to have an like I was talking about with 40k earlier, you want to have an engaging inactive turn. So 40k has done the simple things like the illusion of the armor save. I heard somebody mention in the chat earlier, where it doesn't really matter who makes the armor save. These are almost administrative tasks, right? Just as easily your opponent could roll your saves for you, and it wouldn't mean anything. But you do it yourself, and now you have the added benefit of things like stratagems, where you can use command points to affect the outcome of those rolls by just tilting the odds slightly in your favor. Your army might have a unique command ability that lets you do things. There's armies like the Inari for the Eldar, where they have units die. They used to be able to attack other units. They just since removed that from the game. That was too powerful. People spammed into that and it went away. Paul one says, I'll play anything to be fair. I'm just a wargaming whore. Mailbag says, Ash, my Imperial Guard's Shadow Armageddon team is getting wrecked, but oddly enough, I think the IGOUGO is fine for Shadow Armageddon. My loss in the results of the game wasn't a result of the turn system. Well, it's funny because Shadow War is a game, again, that has built-in mechanics like Overwatch to try and compensate for that. And that allows you to do things during your opponent's turn to try and react. There's also a lot of stuff in Shadow War that people don't think about. So, for instance, Owen and I became very good at hiding from each other, mostly because hiding is a way of getting around being shot during your opponent's turn. Again, trying to create a puzzle that isn't just, I walk forward to my opponent's guns, he shoots, we just kind of grind into each other like battleships at sea until one of us sinks. We would do things to try and outfox each other. So I had my hiding Night Lords, Space Marines just hiding in the dark, trying to ambush his guardsmen. He'd have his chemical guys way up in buildings all separately, so I had to hunt them down all one at a time. I know there's tons of things like that in games that are IGOUGO still that try and pull in that engagement. I think whether or not that's successful almost is determined by how you feel when the game's over. And if you don't feel like that was a detraction from Shadow War, obviously it wasn't, because you had options, especially if you know what those options were. I think that's a big part of the tilting games like War Machine, or even sometimes in Malifaux, where you're not really sure what's happening because a big thing drops on top of you and you didn't see it coming, is if you can leave a game knowing what you could have done differently to avoid it, that's one thing. If you leave a game and you have no idea what happened, or at least only a vague idea of what happened, and zero idea how to prevent it from happening the next time, then that's an issue. And it's either you as a player issue, you just need to go and learn more and research more, or it's an inherent game design problem where stuff is so sort of like hidden between interlocking combos. If there's stuff on 6 different cards that all locks together in a way, it's not going to be self-evident to a player from the very beginning. It makes it a higher learning curve going forward for people to pick the game up. And you have to accept that if your game turns into that, it can be off-putting for new players. It can present challenges even to growth. What else we got? Mailbag says, the more decisions mixed with dice rolling. There you go. Oh, the chat's just disappeared. It's funny because it jumps. I try and scroll it slowly, and then it jumps to the end, and I have no idea where it's gone to. Let's find out. Toby Hall, Epic Armageddon works better than 40k as IOU because there's less counter move to move around. 40k was a skirmish game that outgrew its rule set. It's interesting, Epic Armageddon isn't actually an IGOUGO system though, it's integrated game turn. Because you get priority and you activate a company, and then you either retain the initiative with a penalty to your initiative roll, trying to shoot them in order, or you hand the initiative over to your opponent. Epic Armageddon's funny because much like Depth Titanicus, it's an integrated game system. It's actually not an IGOUGO game. And that's something a lot of people don't know about it. I think that one of the reasons it might feel like an IGOUGO system is companies can be quite large. Like, for instance, once you start adding support attachments to something like an attachment of Leman Russes, it can be 10 Leman Russes with 3 Hydra Flak tanks, with Chimeras full of guardsmen, with Ogryns attached to it, right? And it feels like you're having a whole 40k army move at once. Because scale-wise, you are. Like, a single assault order from a game of Epic Armageddon is actually an entire game of 40k, if you think about it in ground terms. But that system actually was not an IGOUGO system, except for in a very brief moment with Epic 40k. It was always an integrated game turn where you would pick a company and activate them, pick another company and activate them, and go back and forth. So while the game did experiment with IGOUGO, in the end, the sort of penultimate edition right now, which is Epic 40k, or not Epic 40k, Epic Armageddon, it's still actually an alternate activation system, which I think is one of my favorite things about that final version, where it was Jervis taking all the things he liked about all the previous iterations of the game and kind of banging them together into a very playable rule set. And Epic Armageddon, I think, it's not my favorite necessarily, but I think it is one of the most competently written versions of the Epic game. Jonathan Lowry says, I was already fond of the Lord of the Rings system, move, shoot, fight, with the use of might to allow heroic interrupts. Yeah, absolutely. I think that it works very well for other games it was used in, too, because it was used for Legend of the Old West, and it was also used for Legends of the High Seas. It's a great system for just having player engagement, because things are always happening on both sides. Mike Wolf asks, what's wrong with the AOS turns? It's simple and it works, and it helps control the tide of war as you can get double goes. I think that is absolutely true, but the tide of war thing can cut both ways too. You can have a really good first turn and then get to go again, and then have a really good turn again, and it can feel like something out of your control tilted the game. In fact, one of the biggest, I think, criticisms right now of Age of Sigmar from players that play lots of games is the possibility of double goes. It's just a random game turn. And there was a big worry that 40k was going to go that direction as well. I personally don't think it's a problem in a scale for a game like Age of Sigmar, but I can accept that with certain builds in your army. So let's for instance talk about the double Celestial Hurricanum, Kurnoth Hunters, Gryph-hounds, Glade Guard list. This was a very popular list in the beginning before the General's Compendium. Actually, even during the General's Compendium, of just order. So it was an order list for Age of Sigmar. And all it was designed to do was just shoot you off the table. And if you ever summoned nearby to it, the Gryph-hounds would bark, and the entire army would just shoot you again for free. And then if it got a double round, it would shoot you twice. And it was just absolutely terrifying shooting. Everything counted as shooting, so the Gryph-hounds affected it. And it very much benefited. It was designed to benefit from those double turns. And in fact, I think there was even things in it that could allow you to necessarily get to go twice more often. I can't remember what it was. It might have been one of the battle mages or something like that could affect the ability to go first or second. And so I think you've got an example then of, yes, it's a neat mechanic, and it can very much, if it's used, I think, in the spirit of how it's intended, as a random factor to give maybe the underdog army a bit of an advantage. The underdog has the ability to maybe go first more often. Then it can be a thing that changes the game. It can swing it back in the favor of someone who might have been on the ropes. But, of course, like anything, it can be abused. If you build an army that's intentionally designed to abuse it, you might not have a good time. And it can create to maybe some bad feelings because your opponent might not necessarily have seen that coming. What else we got? Ban. Oh, Della's here. Adult dating for sex. Check my profile for link. I've made it. We've got sex bots in the chat. Fantastic. Thanks, Della. You're removed. Unwanted commercial content or spam. And bye-bye. There we go. Perfect. That's great. I've made it. I've officially got enough people in the chat that the robots have taken notice. The sex robots are here. I don't know. I just imagine all the sex robots are like the one from Futurama. So it's just it's the bender with the two robot hookers. Shut up, baby. I know it. Best Futurama episode ever. What else do we have? Grandpapa Nurgle, so Ben says, I used to be a pet peeve of how people would just walk away during their turn in Warhammer 40k. It's true, I've seen it happen in War Machine tournaments too. I remember watching Owen once build like half an Infinity Army while his turn was happening, or his opponent's turn was happening in a War Machine tournament. He literally just gave his like phone or his cards to his opponent, just like mark my damage, because he had nothing to do, and there was literally no reason for him to be here. His opponent just did whatever he wanted to do. I trust you. Just mark my damage. I'll see you afterwards. See what's left. Inquisitor Shavak says, I think every game could do better for all but a few persons who it works for. You have to know why you game, what you want from the game, and what you need to get out of a game. That's a fantastic point. I think game selection is an art form that you get with age. Because very often you play war games for the very simple reason that lots of people are playing them. And one of the number one things I hear about all the different like smaller games that I play, I would love to play that game, but no one around me plays it. Or I would love to play that game, but I can't get people to stop playing X or Y game that's super popular in my game shop. So playing a game simply because it's easy to get a game of it, while it is absolutely a reason because you'll absolutely get to play that game more often, isn't necessarily the reason to play a game you don't like. If you don't like a game for whatever reason, if you don't think it's the game for you, don't play it. I know it might be easy to get a game, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right thing to make you satisfied with your wargaming hobby. If you only have X amount of free time, pick the right game. Pick a game that satisfies the wargaming experience that you want. I'm lucky in that I tend to like every game, but I like every game because of the people I'm playing it with. I'm just super fortunate to have friends who are the same type of wargamer as me, and what we love doing is exploring and trying new games, telling our own little stories and experimenting with new stuff. So I'm always going to have a good time doing it because it's not about the game itself, it's about the people, and the game is an excuse for me to play games with those people. But there are games that I like more than others, or that I would replay more than others. Doesn't mean I dislike the game, but I know they're not for me. They're not necessarily a game that is up, in my sort of like engagement level, or the thing that is going to set me on fire, either model-wise, setting-wise, component-wise, or even just gameplay-wise. One of my own pet peeves right now is too much stuff on the table. I don't necessarily like games where my immersion's being broken by there just being piles and piles of counters or chits or dials or whatever lying around the table. And I try and keep that to a bare minimum. I like having some of it on table for camera because I want you guys to be able to tell what's going on. But personally, if it gets to the point where it's too busy and there's too much things like just sort of floating around, all of the immersion goes away from me and I stop seeing the little movie happening and it becomes this sort of like dry exercise. And that's when I can feel myself losing interest in a game. It's not as fun for me anymore. I think that's a fantastic point Mr. Fact made. You should know what you want to get out of a game because that's going to help you to pick the right game. What else we have? Hunkle89 says, hi Ash, greetings from Spain. This is the first time I get to watch your live stream. Awesome. I'm glad you got to watch it. That's exciting. Ben immediately picked up on the sex Ash things. Is that a congratulations for me? That's funny. Sarah Lahai says, I've never played an integrated game turn war game. Would you move individual units at a time? Couldn't possibly imagine each individual model taking turns. Well, you're painting Malifaux right now, so guess what? You're playing an integrated game turn system. Malifaux is about activating model by model, and you don't necessarily get to jump and do everything all at once. So once you're playing Malifaux, you're playing integrated game turn system. You flip for initiative so you go in first, and then unless you have things that break up the activation system, like Companion, or any of those other things that let you move twice, like move a model and then move a model afterwards, then you're going model by model back and forth until that game's over. So prepare yourself, because Malifaux is one of those games. What else do we have? Everybody's talking about the ad. This is fantastic. Brett Knoll says, I like games like Company of Iron versus IGOUGO. I also like card flip games where you get one company per card flip. It's funny because I just Brent finished trying out, and you'll actually see it tomorrow, Dracula's America. And Dracula's America uses a playing card hand to determine your activation order, and you get to ante in your activation order, which is a really neat thing. So it's both dice and dice pools, an opposing dice pool game, and also uses cards as like an activation mechanic to ante stuff up. And even the random encounters generated in the game are based on that hand of cards. If you play the exact same card as your opponent, then you actually have a random encounter happen. So like Sasquatch shows up. Still haven't had Sasquatch show up, but I really want him to. I had in my first game, I had one of my two like wish list, having read the book, things happen. You'll find out which when you see the game happen, but it wasn't Sasquatch. I wished it was Sasquatch, but it wasn't Sasquatch. What else do we have? Legends of Abaddon says 2 million years later, time to roll for Battle 1, guys. Battle 1 guy at a time. Yeah, it's funny because 2nd edition 40k had that as a problem, was that when you activated a squad 2nd edition 40k, even though it was IGOUGO, literally every model activated one at a time. And there's certain games that have variations of that. But what's funny is one of its contemporaries, which was Warzone, had an alternating game system. So while still every model in the unit would activate individually in Warzone, all go off and do their own thing, which was a lot of fun. It was then unit by unit back and forth. So I would activate, for instance, my unit of like Bauhaus, Ducal Militia, and they would all individually go off and do something, like 5 or 10 of them. And then you would activate your unit of Imperial Regulars, and they would all go back and do something as well. But they could do different things. Fire machine guns, set up Overwatch. So even guys in the same squad could all take different actions. Now, does that slow the game down? Absolutely. But it was an integrated game turn system, and it definitely made you feel like you're in control of everything in the game. And it was a little more cinematic because everybody in a squad could be a hero. And it's an interesting sort of thing where like you would get into these spread out squads all doing different actions. Guys dug in the front, guys advancing, throwing grenades, guys rushing forward, and it would actually feel like a fire maneuver sort of like outcome, which you would see in like World War II and stuff like that. Blade Wolf 9 says, Eden's one of the games where I want to get into, but are you going to play more games of it? Would you say Eden or Dark Age is more fun? Very different games. Very, very different games. Eden is a very sort of like intimate hyper skirmish where you've only got like 3 or 4 models. So if you really want to lavish some detail on some scenery, paint some models really nicely, and have a very cinematic, like small scope game on a 2 foot by 2 foot board, Eden's your game. Dark Age, 4 foot boards, you're talking 4 times the play space. It lends itself better to bigger games. You can play with 10, 15, 20 models, and the gameplay is very quick. It's also a lot more tournament-y, so Dark Age tends to be a lot more objective driven, and feel a lot more like a game that's meant to be scored with secondary and primary objectives. So you don't necessarily have that same sort of intimate narrative that you would necessarily have. And the objectives, apart from the secondary ones, tend to be symmetrical. So you're both trying to accomplish the same primary mission, and then secondaries are separate, whereas in Eden, everything's asymmetrical, and you're trying to outfox your opponents while trying to figure out what they're doing as well. So it's an interesting dichotomy. So I think it's more, while thematically they both feel post-apocalyptic, what kind of game are you looking for? Because those things will both provide very different experiences. Let's do it to the mailbag, because we are halfway through. We're into 1 o'clock right now. I got about half an hour left. And some of the mailbag names this time around are just fantastic. So I wanted to actually take some of these mailbag questions. This first one is from Only the Guard Die Young. Stupid dad jokes. I love it. What are you hoping to see from this year's chapter approved, or the things with 8th edition that you feel need to be addressed? I'll be honest. Not really. There's some community stuff I think that fix things. The auto go first. I like the ITC fix for that, where it's +1 for having less drops. Building around going first, and then your opponent necessarily probably knowing they're going second with a C's with a 6+ reroll. It's too automatic. You can build whole lists around it. I don't like things where that's a possibility. You can just automatically choose to do something like go first. So if that one makes it in, to just like the first chapter approved. Chapter approved, if you don't know, is the new 40k General's Handbook, like in Age of Sigmar. It'll be a yearly balancing factor, basically, where they kind of roll out like an FAQ or some basic modifications of the core mechanics of the game. Is there anything else in there I'd really like to change? That game's too young. I don't know. It's too young. It's too young and it's too unbound for me to feel like that's really a thing. I don't think that, they'd have to do something that's really radical, but if it's something that's really radical, it would be against I think the core design philosophy of 40k, which is play with whatever you want. Like it's so funny because in 6th and 7th edition they introduced the idea of playing unbound. I think the problem was it was the marketing of that idea. It was what they were trying to say was use whatever you like and just play. And they did a bad job of saying that because what everyone took from the way they I think pitched it was rules don't matter, just go. Just take 25 battle cards, right? 25 Lords of Skulls and play your game. Whereas what they did much more wisely was they soft pitched Unbound in the new 40k, where they took basically, I guess, 20 minutes and they wrote up a detachment for every possible. If you liked a thing in 40k, there's a detachment for it. You like flyers? Take a flyer wing. You like the elites in your army? Take an elite choice army. You want to play, you want to pretend like you're playing the old way? Here, take a battalion. And while they encourage you to take the bigger detachments by having more command points and stuff like that for it, and some of the stratagems are pretty cool, by no means are you restricted in any way in building your army. In fact, they even have a thing called an auxiliary detachment. Just take one of whatever you like. It doesn't matter what it is. Just take it as long as it all shares one keyword. And so it's funny to me because they've basically made the game unbound, but they've given you the illusion, I would say, of an army format. So the thing that they might change in Chapter Approved that I think would be interesting is if they brought back a more structured way to play. Because right now the game is very unstructured, and the top tier armies that you see in the game are very much unstructured armies. They're not. They take the best of whatever's in the army list, and they just spam it times a million. They copy and paste times a million using whatever formation does that the best. You know what I mean? So you want to take Magnus and the Infernal, whatever they're called, the 30-point Psyker guys. Go ahead and take a Lords of War detachment because it gets you your Lords of War. Supreme Command detachment because it gets you Lords of War, gets you a bunch of HQs. And hey, do you want to feel like putting Malefic Lords? They're called. Do you want to feel like putting some kind of elite choice in there? Go ahead and do that too. You get an elite choice as well, and it gives you a CP. So it's interesting. I think there's an opportunity in the Chapter Approved in the future to kind of address that if they want to, but I don't think they want to. I think they're happy with people playing with whatever they want, buying whatever they want, and while it is benefiting or I guess kind of encouraging spam armies because with the openness of the detachment system in 40k, you just literally take whatever the best thing in the army is and just take it 1,000 times, or take whatever the best combination of things is and take it as many times as you can until you're basically sick of taking it. It's the thing that they could maybe address. Will they? I don't think so. I think they're happy people buying whatever they want, and I'm happy to play with whatever I want right now. Like the armies I make aren't very good, but they let me take whatever I want to take. So like. I don't really mind. And I get to play with fun models I've never gotten to play with before, like my knights, my assassins. I get to play with the unit of assassins led by a psyker. Like, it's just if the idea is it's do what you feel day, great. But if the Chapter Approved is designed to be like the General's Handbook and give you like a more structured, competitive way to play match play, there's maybe some things you can do to change it around. I don't know what they are yet, but we'll see. Oh, what else we got for questions in the mailbag? Also, that name was fantastic. Only the Guard die young. Well, not anymore, though, because the Guard are just the best army in the game. I say, having never thought I would say that ever in the history of me playing 40k. Inquisitor Sherlock Obi-Wan Clouseau. That's another Rogue Trader reference. That is actually the name of an Inquisitor in the Rogue Trader rulebook. Don't believe me, look it up. Inquisitor Sherlock Obi-Wan Clouseau. It's... I feel like someone was just drunk. Like Precy was just like having a drunk day, had a little liquid lunch, and decided that was the name of one of the Inquisitors. What new box game, Silver Tower, Necromunda, etc. would you choose to introduce new players into the plastic crack hobby? Gonna set up a game night with some friends, want to introduce them to the hobby. Definitely Shadespire. 100% Shadespire. Shadespire. For a bunch of reasons. One, it's 2 to 4 players. So no matter how many people show up to your game night, nobody's sitting there watching. Everybody gets to be engaged, and everybody gets to play a game. So I would recommend getting two Shadespire boxes and actually just 2 Shadespire boxes. You get other teams if you want, but you can legitimately just play with the same 4 teams or the same 2 teams on each side, and you need two mat space or 2 sets of tiles to play a 4-player game. Super accessible if you're board game friendly, but you're not necessarily miniature game friendly. The models are super easy to put together. And yeah, coming into miniatures from tabletop, I would say that's a perfect sort of like breach. You're going to see it this week because I have my hands on an advanced copy, but Star Saga, which is the Hero Quest in space that Manta just produced, I got a copy of it. It also would be a fantastic one. Aristea by Corvus Belli. This would be my third choice. All three great miniature games, all very different experiences. You've got a space dungeon crawler, a MOBA, and a... Actually, you could almost call Shadespire a MOBA, but it's more like a light war game, I think, than it is a MOBA. So yeah, a deck building game than it is a MOBA. So yeah, so those three games, all fantastic choices. Obviously, it's based on your accessibility and what you get your hands on the easiest, but definitely aces, especially as far as the team things. So Star Saga, not available yet. Air State came out today, so Shadespire, the one's on the shelf right now for you. The 2 to 4 players for Shadespire, I think, makes it a good launch game because the more people you get having fun at the same time learning together, the more likely they are to do something together. And I'll be honest, giving a demo to 4 people at the same time is not bad because they're going to have more fun. It's always more fun dicking around when you first learn the rules because it doesn't matter who wins, and especially if you're playing a cooperative game like Star Saga. So a game like that, all colored plastic, you can play it right out of the box. You don't have to paint it. We're not even paint it for Let's Play. Like, it looks good enough out of the box that I'm just gonna put it down and try it. I might start doing that with board games in general because a lot of the board games now, they come pre-colored. It'll show up well enough on camera that we can just jump straight to it and play. And then I'll play it later on, or paint it later on when we do other things. That would be my recommendation. What's next? Take one more and we'll go back to the chat. Greg asks, have you heard of All Quiet on the Martian Front? Any chance you could cover it or do some games for it? I have heard of All Quiet on the Martian Front. The last I heard, it was being liquidated and someone picked it up. I probably won't for a couple reasons. One, it's a funny scale. For the same reason I do a lot of 15 mil stuff. I tend to focus, I've done some Epic, but I tend to focus my scale stuff on giant robot games. It doesn't show up great on camera, unfortunately. And while I do enjoy it, it's hard to film with really tiny dudes unless there's also big dudes to play with. And there are the Martian walkers and stuff and some tanks. I know there are some bigger models for the Martian Front. But it's a weird enough niche. And again, I'm not sure, I'm actually currently not sure of the state of it. That I mean, if the opportunity came here to play it, someone came in to play it, of course I'd give it a try. But for me to go out and invest like the studio money to do it, it's not necessarily one of the ones that's top of the list because one, again, I'm not sure the state of it, and two, those games in general tend to be harder to do production for just because they don't pop out on camera. Basically, it's hard to tell what's going on and see what's happening. So yeah, if someone came in and brought it in, of course I'd give it a try. I'd absolutely play it, do Let's Play and stuff like that. But would I invest funds in it? Probably not, just because again, it's super niche and it's not necessarily the best for the medium of being on camera and stuff. All right, let's jump back in the chat and see what people are talking about. Mailbag says, man, Shadespire. Paid a Warband for the new Shadespire, and after hanging out in the Warhammer store, I saw Shadespire successfully hooked the hell out of them. Yeah, I'm not surprised. It's funny because it's one of those games I think that is being designed. I talked about this earlier with the why we ever get the miniature board games. It's being designed as a market bridge. I think it's doing a good job of it so far. And so far, they've managed to hold the rudder in that direction too. They're pitching it as one, and they're pitching it to people as one too. And it's a good before Christmas thing because it's a game in a box. You don't need anything else. If you have the box, you can play. And when you're in October, November, December, when so like, this is an experience of mine in hobby stores forever. People would come into hobby stores knowing the person they were shopping for liked that stuff, but just having absolutely no idea what to buy. Being like, he paints things and they're about this big and they're blue. And like, the amount of options of what that could be is almost endless. And so having something on the wall where it's brand new, so maybe a lot of people haven't tried it, it's a shot in the dark, and if nothing else, if he doesn't like it, it's still in the shrink wrap, here's a gift receipt, bring it back, you can trade it for whatever he wants. You know what I mean? Shadespire is a really good example of a good Christmas product. For doesn't even matter if it's a Games, like a Warhammer store, Games Workshop store, for any retailer to have on their wall, because if people like miniatures, even if they don't like miniatures, they like board games. It's a new thing. It's super exciting. Lots of people like try it, and everything you need comes in that box, including the ability to just like snap fit and put the figures together. So, I would say it's gonna be successful just because the timing is really good and the product mix is really good too. And they seem to have pitched it to the retailers well enough that I think over Christmas you're going to see a lot of people have it show up under the tree to check out later on. Torben says, what's a MOBA? MOBA is a massive, multiplayer online battle arena. The original of which was called Dota, I believe. I don't remember what Dota stands for, but it was like a Warcraft 3 mod. And it was about having little heroes run around and do things. And there's lots of versions of it. They can be first person, they can be top down, they can be whatever. The most famous one right now is, of course, League of Legends, the world's biggest MOBA, where there's like bajillion-dollar prizes. the world esports expo, where like you play the game and you make $20 million, something that's like the grand prize this year. I'm making that up. I don't really know. I know it was multiple millions of dollars, and that melted my brain basically. That was a big enough industry. Like, it was on ESPN. That's how big it was. And then there's people jumping into it too, like Overwatch, even though it's a first-person shooter, is considered a MOBA. You typically, imagine instead of having in Street Fighter this huge cart of characters that you would pick from, and two people just fight each other, it's 25 of us all pick a character and go and like play team games and try and fight each other. And that's usually what a MOBA is. So League of Legends is the world's biggest one right now. There's lots of other examples of it. And Aristea is basically a MOBA in miniature form, which is super cool. It's the world's most popular TV, or sorry, the Human Sphere's most popular TV show in Infinity, and they've even done it MOBA style, where there's like this huge like Street Fighter style list of characters, and I think 12 of them are unlocked so far, and there's gonna be more. It's really neat. And I've been playing it a bunch because Owen, being the generation after mine, understands MOBAs far better than I do. And of course, I think it hooks in on his like cultural zeitgeist. And for me, it's Infinity, and it's a board game, and it's super fun, and I paid them all, so I'm excited. Taylor says, "Oh shit, I made it this time." He did. Well, you were just chiming in on Facebook, so like, how did you not make it? Like, literally before the show, you were on Facebook chatting with me, so I don't know how you didn't make it to the chat here. Toby says Christmas Tim Hortons cup. Yeah, man, it's you can literally address the Tim Hortons cups right now to whoever you want. So like, you can show up at work with Tim Hortons and give them out as Christmas presents. This one was to me from me, so obviously there's no name on there. One extra large 2 milk, please. As a parent, send extra large 2 milks to my house. I live on them. Turbin says, "Oh, Ash, what's your favorite IGOUGO game, if any? Inquiring minds would like to know." So, earlier in the show, if you guys go back to the very beginning, I talk about Kings of War. It is absolutely, I think, the best IGOUGO game I've ever played, because it's designed to be an IGOUGO game. Like, from the very beginning, it pulls as much out from the opponent's turn. There's almost no interaction. There's no interaction with your opponent's turn. It's all conscious, and it streamlines the game immensely so that the game is super clean. There's no interpretation needed. The turn just happens to you afterwards. So it's a really good game. I would say, as far as like as intentive design versus outcome in the game, Kings of War is just aces, just perfect. What else do we have? Wildonian says, "I've had the urge to paint some samurai figures. What's a good range to check out if you want to paint up a couple figures? Would it be better for small scale, or just pick a few groups?" Check out Test of Honor. It's the new Warlord game. There's also a whole bunch of Osprey games, which I think North Star does some Samurai for. And actually, Annie at Bad Squiddo Games just did a whole range of traditional female samurai, too, that are fantastic miniatures. So check those out as well, because there's lots of nice models out there. And if you want like a more fancy size one or style one, you can do Bushido, which is it's a mythological Japan. So it's not just samurai, it's samurai and they're sort of mythological creatures like Onis and Hebes and stuff like that too. So definitely if you just want to like get a mix of things, great. But it's lots of great just samurai models in there as well. Test of Honor, though, is a samurai skirmish game. It's very well received. I had a hard time. It's funny because it just dropped off the radar because so much new stuff came out. But like when it first came out, I had every intention of buying the starter set, and it was like sold out and then sold out and then sold out. I just never got my hands on it, so it sucks. Because my buddy Jared actually played a whole bunch of it, and then I never managed to get my hands on a copy, and then it just fell off the radar because it was, I think, a big summer for miniature games. A lot of games came out this summer. Horde Person says Die Show. That sounds right. John Charles says I'm using some Test of Honor terrain for Infinity for you, Ching. Yeah, absolutely. I've got some of the Plotscraft. Actually, it's funny. I've been talking so much this time around. I've actually not built the thing I was needing to build. I'm working on some zombie stuff, so I'm doing a suburban house from Plotscraft Games. So show it to them. You'll see this on Witches Wonders Sunday, as I'm doing some of their modern stuff. I'm going to dirty it up for the post-apocalyptic and see some new things. Oh, and of course, there's Foundry stuff as well. Yeah, Foundry has some great samurai minis. Let's jump back to the mailbag real quick and take a couple more out of there, and then I have 10 minutes left. We'll see what's next. A clever name says, it's a clever name. Well, you mentioned that having a wall of special games in GW stores, again, was not that viable. How do you think they'll make it viable now, and what has changed since they were discontinued? So, for one thing, they've taken the fantasy range, which was like a third of the store, or more than a third of the store, like half a store, and shrank it down to Age of Sigmar. They've repackaged or made direct only tons of units from that, so the footprint for Age of Sigmar is far smaller than Warhammer Fantasy 1 was. And that means that there's a lot more room on the wall. And then they tend to have been condensing the specialist games as well by not having blister packs. They just don't have blisters. So if you're looking at the old specialist games range from GW versus the new one, the old specialist game range was like a few box sets for gangs specifically. So like, so let's say for Necromunda, you'd have like a primary gang box, but then every gang box would also have like 7 blister packs. And those 7 blister packs would be like all the heavies, all the specialists, all the gang leaders, all the juvies, like whatever it was. Same with Mordheim. You'd have all the young bloods, all the alternate champions, all the alternate captains. So you'd have like a box, but then you'd have like 6 or 8 blisters to go with every single faction. It doesn't exist in this edition of all these games. It's just a box set. Because now you have multi-part... multi-part plastic kits for all these things. You don't need to have all these supplemental blisters, which were 1-piece cast or like 2-3-piece cast metals with one pose. You can have a singular sculpt, basically, being one of 25 different options in a plastic kit. And that condenses the wall footprint down massively for specialist games, and means that it's a lot more viable to put back into any retail space, not just Games Workshop stores, but any retail space, because it's core box and then supplemental boxes. So for the new Necromunda right now, it's just a big box and a book. They're going to do separate gang boxes, but if they're in store, maybe it's just for a limited time. Maybe they'll just go to direct. Whatever they want to do. Any company can do that. They don't have to put stuff right in their stores. But doing away with blisters means that the footprint of the wall is going to be way, way smaller. Way, way, way smaller. And that means there's lots of room. And they've already created a whole bunch of room by just reducing the range of the fantasy line down to what's in the Age of Sigmar line instead. You might notice that a lot of things are in getting started boxes and then on the web. So you can order them in box sets like from the Games Workshop web store, but then they're mostly condensed into multi-pack boxes when you actually go to the shop. That, again, saves footprint space. It's just about having smart merchandising. Games Workshop are just fantastically smart at making their product range manageable because they have to be. Like, imagine no other company's been around as long as they have at managing that level of like plastic stock in that number of locations. So they've just got the system down, and they've been through all the challenges. They understand how to condense basically and package what they have in their line to make it A, fit in their stores, B, even more importantly, fit in independent retailer stores, and then C, make sense to customers, where the most important things you have easy access to, and the things you might only need 1 or 2 of, you still have access to, but you just order it online. Last question from the mailbag, and then we're going to jump back in. Elias asks, have you played Inquisimunda or just Inquisitor? What are your thoughts of it? I've played both. Actually, it's funny, my friends in Toronto, right after I left, actually, to go to Memphis, wrote their own fan edit of Inquisimunda they called Damnatus. And it was this, like, sprawling epic. I'm sure we've got copies of the rules somewhere. My buddy Christian wrote it. And they played a whole bunch of it, and it was fantastic. Like, it covered every possible thing you could want to do in, like, a 40k skirmish. This allowed you to do, and it was these crazy kill teams, and it was really, really neat. And yeah, and I think Inquisimunda and of course just Inquisitor, one, they're very different things. So Inquisimunda is basically taking Necromunda and re-skinning the gangs and stuff like that to fit an inquisitorial themed game, to try and make it feel like Inquisitor. Inquisitor was a vastly different animal. It was more like you took the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay core mechanics and then tried to build miniatures into it, and it was a lot of fun, but you had to be committed to having fun with your friends to play that game, because it was very easy to break. It was a brittle game. If you brought a Space Marine, the game broke very quickly. Space Marine could hit you with his bare hands harder than a multi-melta could melt someone, and that's just the way the rules worked. We had to make a lot of fan edits really quickly. Like, for instance, Space Marines were so strong that their bare hands did more damage than a bolt gun did. And so we broke it down that you only got your maximum strength bonus if you're using something in 2 hands. And if you used it 1 hand, you just half your strength bonus. That made the Space Marine a little bit more manageable. It also kind of neutered everybody else, but everybody else, their strength bonus wasn't so high that it was like a multi-melt does damage basically when they're using their bare hands. And so, yeah, it was a game that was ambitious. With the greatest accomplishment of Inquisitor is that it designed a whole sort of like theme for 40k. This dark, soft underbelly of the Imperium. These agents sort of trying to navigate their way through it and unravel all of the sort of like terrible problems the Imperium has. Became a fascination in the 40k universe. It led to some of the best novels ever written for 40k and changed the tone of the universe and just the background writing of that game forever. It became a little more serious, in a lot of ways a lot more adult, and it started to take itself a lot more seriously. 40k fiction after the Inquisitor trilogy by Dan Abnett became less like fan fiction and more like real fiction. A good author friend of mine from back then when it was first being written once said, Dan Abnett's the writer for Games Workshop that's too good to be writing for you. And I think it's true. He took that mythology basically of the Inquisitor and created something truly memorable out of it. And it while it was not necessarily the most memorable of games from a game writing point of view, it was absolutely one of the most memorable properties Games Workshop ever put out for just its long-term impact on the lore and the way that people envisioned and the way that 40k was produced for a long time. So yeah, the Eisenhower trilogy was fantastic. Abbott did a great job of that. I think it was an interesting thing. The game itself, of course, had challenges. My commentary for Inquisitor is always that if it made in 28 mil, it might have been one of the most successful games Games Workshop ever made, but it was made in a completely random scale, unfortunately, meaning it was incompatible with everybody's armies, and so people didn't just buy it to be part of their collections. They had to be interested in building and painting strangely scaled models. That wasn't a great thing, but it was more exclusive, I think, than it was inclusive. And we're designing a miniature game, we want to try and include as many people as possible. So there's a reason why Inquisitor gets played in 28 mil still today, and Inquisimundo was a fan at it to try and make some rules that I think were a little more accessible out the gates to people that wanted to play a sci-fi skirmish game set in sort of like the life of an Inquisitor. All right, we got about 5 minutes left. So let's jump back into the chat, see what everyone's talking about, and wrap this up. Oh, I've missed a whole bunch. We're still talking about... Oh, June's here now. Oh my gosh, how many sex robots are going to show up in this show? This is like the sex robotiest show ever. All right, sorry, June, you gotta go. We're going to remove you from the chat. Oh my gosh, twice. This is show number 27. There's once per week almost this whole year, and this was the second time or the first time ever that I've had sex robots show up in the chat. I've made it. That's it. We're blowing up. Sarah LaHaye asks, what would be a good option for a game that incorporates lots of different armies that you can paint at the same time? A game that incorporates lots of different armies. Oh, we're talking about board games. I don't know. Board game wise, what would be a good one for lots of different models you can paint at the same time? I'm not the best board game person to ask, though, because most board games that are war games or that have miniatures... Oh, you know what? Maybe Zombicide Green... If you like medieval or like classical stuff, Zombicide Green Horde might be a good one, because it's got like lots of hero-type dudes from different races, and it's got lots of orcs and trolls and monsters and things. It's a good mix of stuff, and you get tons of stuff in there, too. Shadespire's another good one. Depending on the scale, DBA is a good one, too, but again, you're gonna find... You're going to have to go online for all that stuff. But DBA armies are really easy to find. If you just Google DBA pre-made armies, if he likes like the Total War stuff, like Rome Total War or any of the classical Total War games, the DBA would be perfect. It's a small scale though, so he's going to be painting like really little dudes. That being said, you'd knock it out. I've lost the thread of what some people are talking about. Ben Ossick says, that's a good point. My local game store doesn't carry GW stuff that much anymore because it takes up too much retail space. Yeah, I think that's a great thing to think about when you think about what you order in. If you're going to be a retailer, you almost have to think about your wall as being like your investment, right? So like, I have X amount of space on my wall. Where am I investing my money for the max amount of return? That's thing what GW is. It's they when you work with GW, they're trying to get you the stuff that turns over the quickest. A lot of times when you work with miniature companies, if you're just ordering from a distributor, the distributor's not going to know what the highest turnover products are. You either have to rely on your community to guess, or do the research yourself and try and figure out what's the things I should bring in. Some good sort of like touchstones is if you're ever going to order a product into your retail store, always order the things that people need to play first. Starter sets and rulebooks. Not so much rulebooks anymore, unfortunately, although there are tons of people that still like to buy rulebooks. I like to buy rulebooks. Having those things on hand, everything else doesn't matter. Until people can play the game, the thing you want the thickest slab of on your wall is the stuff that people get started with. And then you want a selection of things that people need afterwards, but you never want to be out of, the thing you want to have the most of is ways people can start playing a game, because that's how you get people to start playing a game. If you don't have starter sets and rulebooks, you've not invested wisely in carrying your product line. If you're only trying to sell to people that already own that game, you're not going to make a lot of money off it. What you want to have is products in your walls that you can sell to new people. So Shadespire is great because basically everything boils down to that thing. It's a starter set, and there's a few different add-ons that you add on that starter set to play the game. Again, Aristea, single box set right there, expansions that are all going to sit around it. The 2-player starter sets for any miniature game typically are fantastic value, and you can have them sit on your wall and be comfortable that that's there. It's then figuring out what complements that. So if you're going to order the next thing, if you have a 2-player starter set, well, I should probably order the things that go with that starter set. So if you're going to get the War Machine one, for instance, or the Hordes one, you've got Trolls, you've got Scorn. Get a few bits and pieces of Trolls and Scorn stuff that go with that starter set to try and get people interested in actually playing the game. And then things like the 1-player starter sets, War Machines and Hordes, are a great example too of, hey, if you like this other faction, here's all you need to start playing it. So not having a lot of space in your wall, it's about stocking smart, not stocking deep, and thinking before you order what will I always hopefully continuously sell more of as long as new people are trying to learn how to play a game. And then I just make sure that I can always get whatever anyone else wants to add on. A lot of companies do a thing called a weekly order sheet. I know that a buddy of mine, Darren, out in BC, he runs strategies, games, and hobbies. He does a fantastic, it's almost like its own little game night where people get together and they have a sheet of his distribution ordering stuff where he gets all the oddball stuff that he's never going to stock in stores, but his customers are so well trained to come in and get their order in for whatever it is they want, and then he just goes and makes sure he gets it. He puts the order in, he comes in, and once a month everybody gets their oddball stuff. If more stores, I think, did a program like that and did it in a smart way where they are always communicating to their customers, hey, if you want this thing, this is I have a program for this, you know what I mean? Because I'm never going to stock this X or Y thing that you want. Here, order it, and we'll get it in for you. You can then augment and not have to have absolutely everything on your wall, because you never want to order one thing that someone comes along and buys in 5 years. You want to order something and then have to order it again hopefully next week because you've already sold it. And that's where it's like a balancing act of trying to figure out how to do those things. What else we got? Oh, we're going down to the end here. So Ash, what about DBA? Have you ever thought about it? I've played DBA before. I played DBA and what's the other one? There's another one, not DBA. DBM? DBA? DBA? There was another version of DBA that I played. It was like the precursor to DBA. And yeah, no, I've played them both. This is a long time ago now, and I don't have any of my DBA armies anymore. But I've played enough. I've played enough at conventions, and I've played enough with the local gaming clubs to have played several of those games in the past. And I've had armies for them too. The biggest problem with those games, of course, right now for me is just getting opponents out here. It hasn't happened. And again, recording it, the scale isn't necessarily the most camera friendly, especially if you're playing in like 10 or 15 mil, or even 20 mil. It's not the biggest skirmishiest game. What I would like to try is Lion Rampant. I think it's an Osprey game that I've been meaning to play around with for a while. And when it comes in, the second edition of Saga, because now it's funny, I held off on Saga because I had friends who wanted to do it, and then it just all got disconnected, and we were going to do it, and we had a project, and had the models, and then now I have to hold off on it because they're doing a second edition. And we get in these loops of I wish I could do this sooner, and, unless I just do it by myself, it's never as good if I do it by myself and I rip someone into it. It's always better if I have someone who's also excited about it, engaged with it. You guys just get a better experience out of that, so it's going to happen, but I'd like to do games like that in 28 mil as opposed to doing a smaller scale game like DBA. And I know you can play DBA in a larger scale, but I'd rather play it with lots of guys as opposed to just a few guys. What else? I think we're just about done here. Oh no, we are done. Never mind. Juggula. Juggula's a cool game, too. I've actually read the rulebook for that one. I haven't played it yet. DBM. Yeah, it was DBM. Okay, yeah. DBA was first. DBM sucked. That's right. DBM was second. DBA was the original. I forgot. Oh, my gosh. If you want to talk about schism, the DBA and DBM schism was... I've heard lots of people fight about that. I'm not going to get into the DBA versus DBM schism, though, because that's like a really super beardy argument. Paul's one says, Line Rampant's fantastic, and so is Saga. Yeah, no, both are games I'm really excited about, because they give me a reason to paint stuff that I haven't painted, and give it a go. I really want to do... I have all this Fireforge Teutonic stuff, like plastics that I want to paint, I just haven't gotten to, and it looks really nice. Line Rampant's really good. Dragon Rampant is down like silly. So many ways to make up units and armies. Well, it's, as soon as you let... Dragon Rampant, by the way, is the fantasy version of Line Rampant. And as soon as you give your customers a way to make up silly units to represent whatever miniatures they have in their collection, of course it's going to get silly. But that's why you have to have that unspoken handshake agreement with your opponent of, yes, I'm going to try and make this fair as well as fun. Fun not just for me, but fun for my opponents too. So anyway, we are done for today. That was a really good chat. You can always tell it's a good chat when I never actually touch the thing I'm meaning to build, because we're too engaged chatting in the chat and, of course, in the mailbag and stuff too. So next week, a Piece of Ash is going to be on my patrons, me and them chatting. You guys will see it live afterwards. So if you are a patron, of course, I'll put a new link, or even if you're just not a patron, I'll put a link in the mailbag for the new mailbag in the description below, so you can check it out. Big thanks to you guys for watching and for hanging out and chatting today. We'll see you next time for more of this. Until then, I'm Ash. I'm Wargaming.